Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Melisa Danho, and I'm the Dietetic Internship Director, and I'm a registered dietitian here at the UTHealth Houston School of Public Health and with the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. In case you didn't know, the center's vision is healthy children in a healthy world with a mission to advance
high 60s, just so that they could slowly get acclimated to that weather. That's what we did to harden them off. And then they're going to be much more strong once they get transplanted either in your containers or in the raised beds. So this is a really important process to just slowly get them acclimated. When they're in this state as seedlings, they're getting a lot of attention. They have the ideal conditions, more or less. And so it's really kind of a shock if we just would transplant them without slowly acclimating them to the weather. So that's just something about, the timeline for this. It's a great time right now also to get any of the peppers, the eggplant, even your cucumbers. You could start planting all of those outside. As the days get longer and it's warmer, they're going to do really well with our current weather. So let's talk about some of the different pots now. I have a couple of pots here, and these are actually purchased. So they do sell pots that are biodegradable. This one is it's made out of a peat moss, so it's biodegradable, and they sell them usually in packs, which is, it's great that they're sold out there. There's a lot of different options, but they are a little bit more expensive. There are different types of pots. So you could have something like this, which is the biodegradable. There are some that are plantable. When you have a plantable pot, that means that the material can be planted directly into the soil that you have, and it will break down. So similarly, we have toilet paper rolls here, which could be plantable and biodegradable. So they will be able to get planted directly into the, your container, your pot, or your raised beds. And what's helpful with these is that it eliminates any damage to the root. So if you're, beginner gardener and you're a little bit unsure of how to transplant your seedlings, this eliminates any of those problems because you could plant it directly in there. You're not going to disturb the root, and eventually the material will break down. For the biodegradable ones, it reduces the waste, they break down, and they're actually beneficial for the soil. It almost acts as a compost. So another benefit for having these is that it does benefit the health of the soil. The compostable ones, those are a little bit different because they are plantable, but they are not necessarily biodegradable, which means that they're not going to break down as fast as some of these materials. If you use compostable pots, I would recommend that they actually go into the compost instead. And that could be some of that brown matter that you need for your compost to help it break down. And that's really what I would recommend them for, those compostable ones. I prefer plantable or these biodegradable ones as opposed to something that is compostable. So like I said, these are made out of peat moss. There are others made out of coconut coir, which is another material that you will often find in some of that soilless medium. You have some coconut coir in there, which is made from coconut fiber. So it's a little bit more sustainable and renewable than the peat moss. So that's another, good reason to use coconut coir. The coconut coir decomposes naturally, and it offers more aeration to the actual soil and the plants themselves. They actually have feather pots too, made out of poultry feathers, and those, believe it or not, are biodegradable. So that's something that you could look for. They have cow pots, which are made out of cow manure. So you have your fertilizer and your pot all in one, which is, it's great. So those are also really easy. They are going to break down. They're going to release some of those nutrients from the fertilizer, which is the cow manure. So those are some really great options. But if you didn't want to purchase any of these products, what I would recommend is actually using some things that you already have at home. So I can start talking about some of these toilet roll pots first. So saving toilet rolls or even paper towel rolls and cutting them is something that is really efficient, and it's going to reduce waste. These work really well. One of the things I did is I first of all cut the bottom so that we could create the base. So I'm just going to make some slits all around. We'll make 4 just so that we could fold this over and create the bottom base. So you would want to fold it over kind of like a box, alternating so that it's really secure, and pinch it down. So you could pinch the corners, and you have a little tube here with the base. The other thing is I would cut it also. This is a little bit too long. If you have something like corn, which actually requires more room for the shoot to actually grow out, this would be a good size. If you have things like even tomatoes, peppers that require more of a root structure, you could leave it as is. If it's something short, that's, smaller plant like greens or lettuces, you could cut it shorter because they're not going to need as much of that root structure. So you could make something pretty small, which is almost the size of the egg container. And I like to put them in a separate tray because this helps create, just like it packs them in and makes it a little bit more stable. So I already did a couple more here. So I'm going to cut these in different sizes just to show you. Now this cardboard, it is a little bit thicker, especially thicker than the newspaper, which I will show you, which means that when you are ready to transplant this, I would actually soak this in water first, just to make sure that the cardboard gets a little bit soft before you're actually transplanting. And once you have these, now we have our medium here. And you want to fill it to the top. So always try to fill them to the top. Again, I'm just shaking it down, but not pressing it so that we're not compacting this medium. If it's drying out, definitely add some water to it. So here we have these different pots. And once you have this, now would be it. Now you could add your seeds. So I should have some seeds here. We'll just try this out with tomatoes. I don't recommend starting tomatoes right now. Like I said before, if you didn't start your own tomatoes right now, you missed the window of opportunity here. Maybe in other states, if you're in California, you could probably do it at any time of the year. But for us here, we need to start pretty early, which is why starting them indoors is so important. So I just moistened that a little bit, and I'm going to add just a couple of seeds here. In these containers, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of that soil just to cover them. Again, we don't want them too deep in here. Press it down a little bit. And then these are ready to go. As you can see, these other seedlings, they're already doing really well. They need to get potted up, so they need to really go into a bigger pot so that they could continue to grow. And you could do that with or without the pot. So for something like this, again, if you're unsure about, so my soil, I probably need more soil in here, but if you're going to use this toilet paper roll, again, make sure it's wet. This one's a little bit moist, so it's already softening up. It's going to help break down faster. If you didn't want to use it, it's really easy to remove. So if you wanted to remove it when you're ready to transplant these, you could actually just unroll it or cut the sides. If you're, worried about whether it's going to do well or not, so you could do this, transplant it, and then just fill in I would have had more soil here to begin with, so, but just for demonstration, you could remove it, whether it's going to be transplanting into a larger pot or if you have a raised bed. But, again, these are really easy. And they are free from, we buy for the toilet paper, right? But they're much more affordable than actually buying some of the moss pots or even the cocoa coir. And it's going to give you, again, that same effect. These grew really well in these types of containers. So once it's potted up, we're going to wait for it to get bigger, and then it'll be ready for its container. Now, I didn't mention about fertilizer. Typically, when you first start your seeds, especially in your soilless mix, you don't need fertilizer. The seed itself has all of the energy and the nutrients it needs to germinate and to thrive. You don't necessarily want to start fertilizing until after it's grown, and especially after it has a few of the true leaves. So this one, it's looking healthy. There's 2 in here, so I probably will thin it out. But these are looking good. So at this point, I could fertilize. You could use some sort of organic fertilizer, something that's not too high in nitrogen, because we don't want, nitrogen helps with foliage. It helps with all of the green leaves, but we don't want a lot of green leaves. We want the actual fruit. So having something that's low in nitrogen is good. You could use a fish emulsion fertilizer as well, and that's really good for the soil health itself. So these are, again, our little pots made out of the toilet paper. We have the egg crate that I already showed you. You could, again, for both of these, water them either with the spray bottle, or if you have a tray. The tray I have here actually has holes at the bottom. You could see that. So I could put this in a tray, another tray of water, so that they could get watered from the bottom up. And that's also another technique that you could use. It doesn't necessarily have to be from the top down. So the last thing that I'm going to show you is these newspaper pots. So these are probably the most inexpensive, especially if you have an old newspaper lying around. You could use some newspaper. Now, do not use magazines. You see, magazines are glossy. This is not going to break down in the same way that a newspaper will. And the ink on these magazines, it's actually different. It could have some toxic residue that could be left behind in the soil. So we don't want to use any of that. Newspaper, it's actually made with soy ink, and so it's perfectly fine. The newspaper itself will break down. So I have some newspaper here, and I just cut it into a long strip. And I have just a little jar. This is a mason jar. And I'm just gonna wipe this away so that you could see a little better. So once I have my strip, I'm actually going to just fold over the top. So just a rim, I'm going to crease it. I will not leave it folded over though. This is going to act kind of as the rim of the pot. Once I do that, now I have my jar, and this is really easy. We're just going to use this as a, kind of like as our template for making the pot. So I'm just gonna roll this around, and you could use any size that you feel you need. And then I'm going to just flip this over and start creasing the bottom so that I can have the base for it. So I'm going to just crease this, remove the jar. What I want to do is just give it a little fold here so that it's tight. So crease those corners. And at the top where I had that crease, now we could fold that in. And you're going to have a pretty tight and secure pot. This will break down really fast because it is newspaper. So out of all of these, this one is going to decompose the fastest. And you probably won't even need to pre-wet it before transplanting. So I really like these. You could make different sizes for them. They're very inexpensive. And these here, I haven't watered these, I will admit, so these need to be watered. But again, they grow really well in these types of containers. And you would do the same thing. We would fill it with some of that medium. And again, this one's a little bit bigger, so this would probably be a plant, maybe like an eggplant or a pepper that's going to require more of that root. So you could use something this size. You could do something shorter for some of those greens, or maybe your chard, anything else that's not going to need as much room to grow. And then I have a little seed here. So same thing, really just making sure that you have your seed, cover it lightly with a little bit of that medium, and then wet it. And these also are in a little tray. I like the trays again because it helps with that structure and so that they don't topple over. So I'll try to fit this one in here as well. So they're, for the most part, seedlings are resilient. They do really well. All they want to do is grow. So we just have to give them the good environment, some water, good temperature, and some of that nice medium, and they will grow. So these, again, some examples. I think that out of all of these, this egg crate method is the easiest for me, just because the cells are already done. Let's assume that this is ready. We have our seedlings. What you would do is just tear each one off. And you probably want to get rid of this first, but you could just cut off each little cell. And I didn't wet this, but it's much easier when you wet this first because it's going to be just softer. Right now there isn't much moisture in here, but you would cut each one of these out, and each little egg cell is going to go directly into your container or your raised bed, and you don't have to do much about it. So definitely soaking this and the toilet paper roll is going to be really important just to help it break down a little bit faster. But I do like this method of the egg crates. Again, they sell these kits, but why buy one if you could actually reuse something from home and make your own? So I think that's it for this demonstration. We have time for questions if there are questions out there.
Thank you so much, Dolores. I definitely learned a lot. This was really informative. I feel more confident and ready to start from seeds. So remember, y'all, if you have any questions, you can definitely type them in the chat. Um, we do have one question. Someone asked, what brand of soilless medium would you recommend, and where can you purchase it?
I One of the ones we've used a lot is called Pro Mix, and the reason I like that is because it already has that mycorrhiza fungi that's really beneficial for the soil. You could get it at a local nursery. They sell other growing mediums like you know the big stores. They sell like Jiffy, which makes these little pots, sell some. You could get them online. A lot of the seeds I get are from Johnny's Seeds, and they have a really good growing medium. So those are some good options.
Okay, great, thank you. And then do you have any recommendations for grow lights?
So when you get grow lights, the main thing is you want to ensure that they are between 5,000 and 7,000 Kelvin. So that's, the similar wavelength to the sunlight. Honestly, these I got like from Amazon, and they were pretty inexpensive. They've done really well. So just look around, as long as they're, they have that, I don't know how you measure, I guess the Kelvin. If they're between that 5,000 and 7,000, that's going to be ideal. And that'll be good for seed germinating.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about acclimating plants to the outside weather? About, do you need to make it warmer or cooler?
Right. So for a lot of the plants I talked about today, just because of the season, these are the summer crops. So they got started in around January. And the process of acclimating is when you are ready to start transplanting. If you have larger containers or raised beds, every day take them out into the sun, especially for a couple of hours a day when it's starting to get warmer. So, I mentioned earlier our tomatoes got started in mid-January. Mid-January and February were really cold, right? And so it was honestly difficult to acclimate them, just because the temperature was just not cooperating, or the weather outside was not cooperating. So sometimes you have to even maintain that same temperature indoors, making sure that they're warm. And it wasn't until maybe late February when we started taking them outside, getting some sun. There were some days where it was too windy. The wind, we have to be careful because it dries out the soil. It could dry out the plant also. That can cause the plant to get damaged. So being sensitive about wind is also something that's important, in addition to the actual climate. So making sure just that it's sunny, you're getting nice weather above 60. The plants, the tomato plants themselves, they may die if it's lower than 40 degrees. They may not die, but that does not mean that the plant itself hasn't been affected and that it's going to affect the yield of the fruit itself. So just looking for those warm days, a little bit of sun at a time, when we're thinking about these starting in, the winter for more of our summer crops.
That's great, thank you. And then how do you know when seedlings or larger plants are ready to move to the next size container?
That's a good question. So I talked about true leaves. When you have something that's relatively small, you're first going to see a little, it's called the cotyledon, which is just two little leaves, and they almost have the shell of the seedling attached. And then they're going to start getting true leaves when you have something that is about 2 inches tall. This one's about 1, so it probably needs a little bit more time. And when it has more of the actual leaves in there, that's when it's time to get to a bigger size container. So you don't necessarily want to put this in the container it's going to live if it's like a 3-gallon container. You want to get bigger, maybe even get something this size, so bigger, so that it continues to grow until you put it into where it's going to live. But looking for about 2 inches and then more of those true leaves is what you're looking for.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you've got, just so you know, lots of compliments in the chat about, what people have learned and that they want to try things. Um, so I actually have a question as well. How do you know if the seeds are germinating or not? Or how long do you wait?
That's a good question, and it depends. So every crop is going to take a different amount of time to germinate. The best thing to do is to consult with the seed packet, and it will tell you on here that it needs, this one needs about, it's actually it's saying to grow up between 60 and 70 degrees, which is helpful, something I've already mentioned, right? And to plant them after frost danger. So you're going to see this a lot in the seeds as well. And the germination will also be on here. It could range anywhere between 7 and 21 days. So sometimes we get, really nervous if at that 7th day we don't see anything sprouting. And this happens to me all the time where I think, oh gosh, the seeds weren't good, nothing's happening. And then maybe 2 weeks later, you see them germinating. So making sure that you're just looking at the type of vegetable you're growing, looking at how long it's going to germinate, and all of that information is going to be there in the seed catalog or the actual seed envelope. And following that, a lot of times, something like a radish, you'll actually get the root itself within 21 days. Carrots are really fast too, lettuces, but other plants like your eggplants, your peppers, they're going to take a little bit longer, which is why it's important to monitor them every day.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question. Can you recommend a good book about starting from seeds?
Oh, good books. We have a lot of resources, yes. And what I could do is that we're going to actually provide a handout with all of the things I talked about today, step-by-step instructions. And we can also add some great resources and some books on that handout that will be posted along with the webinar.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question. If the seeds take longer than expected, does that mean that they'll be stunted later?
No, not necessarily. They won't necessarily be stunted. Again, it may just be that they're older seeds. But if they germinate, once they're planted, that's success. They're going to be well as long as you feed them, you give them the right environment, so they won't be stunted.
Do you have any recommendations for natural pesticides or anything to ward off from fruit flies indoors?
So natural pesticides, yes, for a lot of these neem oil, orange oil, those are great pesticides. They have to get diluted. BT is something that's great for lettuces and all of your brassicas, which are, your cauliflower, broccoli, kale, those types of vegetables. That's something that actually helps kill any of those worms, but it doesn't affect any other animals. So if a bird eats it or bees, butterflies, it actually doesn't affect them. It just targets those types of worms that are going to eat through those grains. So yeah, BT, neem oil, and I think orange oil are probably the best. Insecticidal soaps also are a good natural organic type of pesticide. And we can add that also to our handout.
Great. And what about for lettuces?
BT.
BT also. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. And then for sprouted seeds, so if you have too many sprouted seeds, is there something else you could use them if I don't want to plant all of these?
Right. So if you have a lot of sprouted seeds, you want to thin them out and make sure that you are giving each one enough room to grow. So thinning out would be the first thing. For some plants, you could, especially if they're lettuces, if they're greens, eating them at that sprouted stage. Those are actually microgreens. So you could eat them as microgreens, put them in a salad, something like that.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. All right. Um, and are there any other factors that we could consider when we're thinking about compostable pots? I mean, you had mentioned price and like the different types. Um, you know, any other things we should be thinking about?
I think just the environment, when we buy plastic pots, a lot of times people don't tend to reuse them. So they go to the landfill, which is why it's so important to buy these and especially make your own. Again, this doesn't cost anything. This is probably going to go into the garbage. And so if we could use this material to reuse it and reduce the waste that's going out into the landfill, I think that's really something that's important for the environment.
Okay, great. All right, so let me just also share our center's webinars. So if you want to um, look up the webinar, oop, okay, there we go. Can you guys, if you want to look at the webinar, you can go to the Dell Center's website to see this webinar and other webinars. Like Dolores was saying, we are also going to post resources up here that she's mentioned, some of the recommendations. Someone else also asked if you want to give a class on succulents, so we'll see if we could do that. I don't know. But we really appreciate y'all joining us today. I want to thank Dolores so much for this presentation. I know I learned a lot. It looks like y'all learned a lot. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.